Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to IBI's webinar on analyzing the success of workplace health programs. I'm Kelly McDevitt, president of IBI, and I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. A little bit of background. Every year, IBI asks our 1,400 plus members what topics they would like us to research. And this year, as you can imagine, we had a lot of overlapping topics last year and this year that were really focused on the effects of the pandemic. And so one of those is actually an age-old question that we in the healthcare industry have been trying to answer with our employer partners for many, many years. And that is, and especially during the pandemic, there are a lot of point solutions in the industry out there, and they cover the gamut from mental health to workplace health programs, to fitness programs, to disease management programs, and the like. And we've all always been wondering, how in the world do you know, A, which one to pick, which one is the best, which one is going to suit your employees and make them the happiest? How are you going to measure the success of those programs on an ongoing basis? And what type of data do you need to do so? And so this year, when our members voted this as one of the top topics they wish to have researched, we weren't surprised by any means, but we did get some really good insights for employers. And these may seem rather elementary to you, but we were kind of shocked at what the data showed in how many employers do not use a format or a focus to constantly be measuring the effectiveness of these products and programs at work. And so our lead researcher on this project, Carole Bonner, is going to present to you what our findings are. And then we have a special guest star today, Rich Krutsch from ArcBest, who's going to have a little conversation with me at the end of the presentation and talk about really practical ways in which to measure the success and how ArcBest has done this in their own programs. So without further ado, we will have a Q&A. You'll have the opportunity during the presentation to type your questions in. Please go ahead and type them in as we go. I will then answer the questions with Rich and Carole at the end of the presentation. And this particular presentation will be available on our IBI website and recording of the webinar. So we'll have Carole right now present the findings. Carole?
Thank you, Kelly. I'm happy today to talk about analyzing the success of workplace health programs. And just a little bit about me. I was an analytics professional in corporate, as well as a consultant. My background is in math and statistics, and I have researched and I taught in academia. So now I'm happily a researcher at IBI. I came on in October and inherited this project. And it is perfect for me because it melds all of those things together. So we're going to get started. I want to talk about first what we're going to go through, and that's the background of the research and the objectives. And then we're going to dive in, talk about the program components that are being offered. What are the data trends and challenges to measurement? And then we're going to talk about what everyone wants to know. How do we define success? How do we measure it? How do we present that to leadership? So a little bit of background. WHPs have garnered a lot of attention in recent years, and this has become a widespread model for companies across the globe. So interest stems from a recognition that if we have optimal health for our employees and evidence-based interventions, and we sort of push that through the pipeline, then we can get the best possible results, best possible performance, and control healthcare expenditures. So when we survey our members, find out what their interests are. We sort of comb through the literature, talk to stakeholders, and forge what our objectives will be. So we came up with, just to provide some context, what programs are being offered. Are the offerings different cross-sectionally? What types of data are being captured regarding WHP offerings? How are these data being used? That's an important question. And what are the challenges to measuring impact? And then we get to the meat of the matter. What defines a successful WHP? How do we track that performance? And how do we present that to leadership? So let's talk about program components. We looked at data collected by the CDC. It is nationally representative, and it describes the offerings of US worksites, their programs and their practices. It is unusual in that it includes worksites that have small number of employees, less than 50. And if you look at it, those sites that have more than 500, it's 1%. The sites with less than 500 is 99% of the sample. And if you look at this one, and you have to bear that one in mind, 57% of this sample is work sites with 10 to 24 employees. So we have a good weighting of small, medium, and large. Of course, across the sectors, it's weighted. And across regions, it's pretty even. Southwest and West are the least. So bearing that in mind, you've got 57% of your sample, 10 to 24 employees. Less than half, that's 46% of the work sites offer some kind of health program to employees. 33% offer health promotion programs, 24% health screening, and 19% disease management. Now, this survey was conducted before the pandemic. So let's look at some of the trends. And to do that, I pulled from the literature from SHRM, who surveys their attendees to their national conference every year. And to accommodate the employees' needs in the pandemic, stress management programs were increased, mindfulness programs were increased, and life coaching. These are the top 3. All of them center around mental health and well-being, while incentives for completion was reduced, health risk assessments were reduced, and participation discounts, and all of these were difficult to do in lockdown. So let's look at the data. 50% of work sites with programs reported that their work site used data to evaluate programs' success. And remember, our overarching question here is, how do we evaluate success? So only 53% with programs looked at it for strategic planning. 52% change in disease rates. 50% evaluation of program success. And we can't evaluate if we don't have the data, right? So 98% collected data about participation and 90% feedback, which is very good. It's very good, very necessary. So when asked, what are your barriers to offering WHPs. We're talking, there were lots of barriers, but I'm just going to talk about the ones that impact the data and evaluation. Cost, 58% say this is a barrier. And this was the same for large sites and small sites. Lack of trained staff. This was a bigger problem for the smaller sites, which makes perfect sense, but still a problem for the larger sites. Demonstrating program results, 25%, but this was a bigger problem for the larger sites. When asked what training or technical assistance topics would be most useful for the people responsible for these programs, use of best practices was at the top, 76%, right? And larger sites, 90%. Program planning, implementation, and evaluation skills, about 46% of the sites say they need this kind of training and technical assistance. And this will help you guide some of your offerings, some of your benefits to your employees, some of the programs that you need to stand up in order to get the most out of your WHPs. Documenting health improvements and cost impacts, 43%. 70% of the larger employers find this lacking in training and technical assistance. Very important. So knowing what the barriers are, knowing what's going on, let's talk about how do we know if those programs are successful? One of the things that I didn't put on this slide is you've got to have your data. You've got to have your data. So where we're going to start, you want to know if the program is successful, but you have to backtrack. You have to start at the beginning. You can't start at the end. So the strategic planning phase may or may not have happened, but this is what are we trying to achieve? What will we do to achieve it? Again, I say I was an analytics professional, and I know people would come to my desk or send me an email and say, I need to know this. Well, I have to do due diligence and find out, where did we start? Why do we have this program? Why is there a need? What did we do to achieve our goals? And so when you plan the goals, when you planned your goals, plan to measure. So they need to be measurable goals. Once you have your plan, your goals, and it may be that you have to retrofit this, the plan and goals, you have to track that performance. How are we doing? How can we improve? If you track all along, you report out all along, then you won't have surprises. And then you can demonstrate the value. Given those first two steps, you can demonstrate value because you know what your goals were. You know if you attained your goals. You know if you made progress towards your goals, and you can demonstrate that. So in the strategic planning phase, you need to be proactive. You need to address all of the components that will meet your employees' needs. And we have more information. I did a blog not too long ago about a comprehensive plan, but that's outside the scope of this webinar. You have to prioritize investments with the highest impact. So the way to do this is to identify which conditions are responsible for the largest share of the organization's healthcare costs. Looking at claims data, I've included some resources to help you with that. If you don't have claims data, it's okay. You can go to benchmarking, scorecards, all sorts of things to sort of get a baseline of what is most impactful. You want to calculate the financial cost of risk factors. So risk factor cost appraisal. Here are some resources online to help with that. You want to know when you're going to break even to your investment, offset your costs, the benefits offset your costs, cost effectiveness analysis. All of these things require data. They don't necessarily come from one source. It might come from different departments, but they are all baseline for where you're going. Right? And so you want you make sure that you project best, worst, mid-range outcomes because you want to know the progress you're making. Did you make fabulous progress? Did you make terrible progress? You have to evaluate, you have to continually improve. Just a short example. Suppose, and this is totally made up, don't question my numbers. Suppose a company has an opportunity. Musculoskeletal claims are responsible for 1.6% of the frequency and 41% of the cost of all work-related claims. So you set a goal in your planning phase to reduce these claims by 7%. And then you map out a strategy, increase utilization of health coaching and attendance of chronic MSK conditions. That is your strategic plan, and that's just one snippet of it. But that gives you an example of how you can go to this phase, and that's tracking KPIs that come from that phase. So resources, external, internal benchmarking. You want to know where your employees are and where they match up to other employees. And you can find these things from research, industry tools, claims data, and then you want to evaluate it. You can look at scorecards. There are lots of them out there, and I'm not one who believes that any one scorecard is good for every business. I think it needs to be customized for your business because everyone has different needs. So you can start out baseline with one of these scorecards and you can add elements as you go. So you develop those indicators and follow performance. You have your KPIs, you can develop dashboards, you can just have reports, and you might report out quarterly, might report out annually, depends on your organization. But these things hinge upon the work that you've done thus far. So for instance, continuing with that example, you have Q1, MSK health coaching utilization improved by 2%, 354 employees attended MSK conditions education sessions, and improvement is we're going to stand up a virtual option. And there you can demonstrate that value by saying, we've increased utilization by 6%. We have this many who attended, and now MSK claims are responsible for 0.9% of the frequency and 28.4% of the cost. And that might look like that, just one little section of your report. And this will help to demonstrate. Now, this is just one example. You have to do these things. There are some things that my boss calls squishy that you can demonstrate, you can monetize, and there's more information in that report about value on investment. So to sum up, if you want to know if your program is working, you have to start with the strategic goals and establish those early KPIs. You plan to measure, track performance, and then demonstrate your value.
Thank you, Carole. And I love that you use one of my very technical terms that I coined in the industry, squishy data. But therein lies the problem. So I know some of you, I looked at the attendee list, have been in the industry a really long time, and you're listening to this presentation that Carole has done so much work on and thinking, well, yeah, those things all make sense. That's, right, that's elementary. But realizing that 50% of employers don't offer these types of products and programs. For those of you who've been around forever, you're used to this. We've had DM programs in place for 25 years and, health coaching programs, and that's not the issue. What we designed this research around was those employers who don't know how to tackle this and who don't know how to track and need to break down the barriers that are in their way for why they don't have them. And so that's why we've invited somebody who has tackled this problem rather successfully. So I want to introduce Rich Krutsch. He's the Vice President of People Services at ArcBest. And we're going to have a little conversation about, a real life example where you can put these things into play, and one that is, I consider, a best practice. I think ArcBest does a fantastic job of products and programs. So Rich, welcome. Thank you for joining us today to help really bring this whole conversation to light. So Rich, I'll let you introduce yourself and what you all do at ArcBest.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kelly. Yeah, we are, like Kelly said, I'm Vice President of People Services here at ArcBest. ArcBest, if you're not familiar with us, we're one of the nation's largest end-to-end logistics suppliers. So when you think about a healthy workforce, you probably don't think of transportation companies right at the top of the list, but we're really working on that. We've got 250 locations across North America. We've got 15,000 employees. So we've got every kind of employee from our frontline essential workforce to data scientists and robotics engineers. So we see just about everything. So our solutions have to be scalable and able to fit in a variety of work environments. So it's kind of what we do.
Thanks for that, Rich. So I want to kind of start at the beginning. I know people who sit in your seat. I know a lot of people who sit in your HR seat. And what I hear most from them is, oh my gosh, every day I get 10 calls from point solution companies telling me that they're the best and they're going to solve all my problems. Sometimes they come with really great ROI or VOI stories. Sometimes they come with what I love to call squishy data, and it doesn't really fit with your needs. So let's back up to the way beginning. How do you know you have a need?
Well, I think you've got to understand your employees, right? If you don't understand your team members, then everything downstream of that is not going to work, because if you don't know what they need, then it's going to be really hard to give it to them, is kind of the common sense kind of statement to that. But we do it a lot of different ways. We do pulse surveys to understand if we're meeting the needs of our workforce. The problem that I have with pulse surveys, though, is that I think you tend, if you're not really careful, you tend to lead your audience, right? And I'm not going to, there's a consulting group, I'm not going to name them here, but they called me up and said, you need these 5 things in your plan. And I said, well, how do I know that I need those? And I said, well, it's because we've done this survey. I said, well, what were the questions? And if you look at the questions, I think you almost kind of always lead the witness here on these things. So I think a lot of times people don't know exactly what they need. They know they've got a problem. So I think if you understand what your people are struggling with, And that's a question we ask a lot, is what are you struggling with today? And if you understand what their struggles are, then you can kind of build solutions around those struggles so that you can optimize their experience. And I think one of the best things that we do is we operate we call it a network of champions. And that's 75 members of our population that they span every walk of life in our organization, from C-level to frontline workers. And we stay really close. They're kind of our eyes and ears out there. You know, we can't be everywhere all the time, but they're the people that kind of are feeding us information that they're hearing, and we're in turn keeping them ahead of the curve on the things that we're doing. So we do a lot of work to try to stay in sync with our workforce.
That's awesome. And I think that's one of the struggles that I hear from employers today is, I know there's challenges in my workforce that people are living with every single day. When we talked about a lot about mental health, obviously this year, and stigma, employers are really redefining their social contract with their employees, aren't they? You know, you used to just be the employer, the paycheck, and now you're sometimes the priest, the counselor, the mom, the dad, the support system for your employees. And I think employers are struggling with how do you get to Joe employer and know what that guy needs, right? And maybe a supervisor or a leader, manager can see there's something going on, but without that in-touch sort of workforce that you have set up, I'm not sure that many employers, other than a pulse survey, have the beat on what's really going on in their employees' lives. So that was a really important point that you brought up. Having people on the ground, boots on the ground, in front of employees, having those conversations, I think is key for employers. So now you know you've got a problem, and you know what the challenge is. It's time to start figuring out which of those million-point solutions that are out there are for ArcBest. How do you start that process?
Well, we don't use structured RFPs. Well, I'll take that back. We use them very surgically on some things that we feel they're appropriate. Most of the time, we do not use an RFP, but we do because we don't want someone curating a list for us, right? We want to curate our own list, and we want to make sure nobody's excluded. And sometimes we use a lot of solutions a little off-label too, right? And we'll say, yeah, we understand you can do this, but we really want you to operate like this for us. And so we want to be able to have those discussions with people as we're going through this process. So we start with a broad net, and then we start narrowing. And then when we get down to maybe the last 3 or 4, we're going to pilot that, because we want the experience for our members to be right. And, and even though that they may be the very best in their field, sometimes the experience is just not what we need, or doesn't resonate with our team members. So we pilot them, and then we look at the responses from our own members and say, okay, what did you like here and what did you not like? What could we do better? What helped? Was this an effective solution for you? And then we continue to narrow down till we get to one. But we also look for values alignment. Does the solution align with our values? Are they going to fit well in our ecosystem? Are they going to play well with others? Are they going to create synergy? And I think that's really important. You want the sum of your solutions to be better than any of them are individually. So it's got to be cohesive. It's got to be holistic. So that you're continuously looking for how do you improve that synergy, and how do you manage those handoffs in those your ecosystem partners.
Okay, so I heard a couple of really key things. First of all, just because it's a big brand name that you've heard before doesn't mean it's the right solution for your company. Right. And that you have found that maybe some of the smaller boutique kind of solutions are more flexible to be able to work around your needs, right? So there's nothing more frustrating than, and I know this from experience, picking a solution that in the finals meeting sounded like it was exactly what you needed. And then when it came time to, writing the contract about, who was able to be in the program and how many participants they could accept and over what period of time would the program run, then we start running into, well, wait a minute, that doesn't fit our needs. if you work with a smaller vendor, sometimes you get a little bit more flexibility. Does that sound right?
Yeah, it does. And sometimes a large provider will be able to provide that same kind of flexibility. It just depends. And I think it depends on kind of the DNA of the solution you're looking at, what their leadership. We always look at the leadership team. Who are they? What are they like? How long have they been there? We look at their funding because we want something that's going to be sustainable going forward. We don't have to switch it out the next year. We try to take a, and I like the word holistic's been overused way too much, but we do try to take a holistic view of a partnership when we look at it.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. Like you said, there's nothing worse than implementing a solution that you've gone through a pilot, you've gone through an entire implementation, and then come to find that it's not really fitting the needs, or their company isn't surviving, and then you're starting all over again. That is not the goal here. Okay, so now you've whittled down your list. You know that they're flexible enough to be able to plug and play well with all your other solutions. You know that their culture aligns with yours. And I think the whole other point, little nugget that you just said there that people should listen to is you got to know their leadership, right? So knowing that your values are aligned with their leadership's values is super important in the long run. Just it can't be beat. If it doesn't align, you could run into all kinds of problems downstream. Right. So now you've whittled it down. You've done your pilot and you've implemented. Now what? Now, how do I know that this is working, and what am I doing to measure that success?
I think, along the way, you've got to determine whatever issue that you're attacking, whether it be behavioral health or women's health, or whatever it is. You've got to determine what your lead measures are and your lag measures are. Sometimes health risk is your lag measure, and your lead measure may be engagement, right? It could be that your lead measure is the number of times people engage with that solution over time. That's what you're after. Your bet is that if you hit those lead measures, then you're going to hit that. You're also going to move that lag measure as well. So what you've got to do is build the milestones that you need using your lead measure to get to the output you want where the movement you want your lag measure to change. So we're very once we go in with a partner, we do a lot of work on what are the appropriate milestones in this, what are the engagement or the other metrics that we expect to see, and we track to those, and we make sure that we're getting those along the way, and we hold the partner accountable, and that's all discussed up front before we ever sign, so that we know what we expect of them and what they can expect of us. We tell them what we are committed to from a communication engagement, a ability for them to reach out to our members. We're all clear, we're defined, and then we're going to work with them.
You handle it if a solution doesn't measure or isn't able to provide the data that you're looking for. Are they a partner of yours? Do you help them develop new ways to measure, or are you just walking away and finding the ones who can?
Yeah, and I didn't say this up front, Kelly, but we're a little unique in that we are an employer and a payer, right? So we are measuring all of our solutions all the time anyway. So now we do want them to be able to give us enough data so that we can measure them, right? That's critical. So we and sometimes it's as simple as we need to know exactly the number of engagements per member that you're tracking to, right? Like we've got a virtual physical therapy solution. We're watching that really closely as it ramps. Who are they interacting with? What is that looking like? What's the experience like? And because I think one thing that you can never take for granted is the word of mouth within your own population. That travels faster than any email that we're going to send out. And we want to make sure that word of mouth, especially early on, is really positive. So that we get good engagement long term, and that spreads kind of that peer-to-peer learning.
Well, and I remember back in the days of telehealth, when telehealth first started, unless Joe told Bob, told Steve that they had a really good experience with telehealth, all the magnets and flyers in the world that you sent out weren't going to work. So I think that's another important nugget that you just gave. Ramping up a program while you're doing the pilot is really important because let's face it, out of all the programs you pilot, you probably implement those that you chose to pilot, right? More often than not. And so doing that upfront work to get people excited about it, and obviously you having your boots on the ground, folks, educated and talking about it before it ever rolls out is a way to really help engagement. But let's talk about that word, engagement. Because that is, it's been a bad word in the insurance industry for such a long time. What does engaged really mean? I mean, I remember walking into quarterly meetings with my clients and being absolutely thrilled that we had hit 3.5% engagement in their diabetes and, asthma programs. And those days are gone. So no more do we consider engagement just because you had one session with a health coach. How do you now define engagement, and who defines engagement for you at ArcBest? Is it the employee who defines it, or is it you, or is it the vendor who is measuring?
I think it's all of the above, but I want to back up just a second here. I think one of the things that's missing in health and well-being programs in general is that in business we do a lot of work around change management. If we're going to acquire a company, or if we're going to implement a new business process, we've got a really structured program around change management. So, the first thing that we do is start building an awareness for the need to change. Then we give once we build an awareness, and that's before we ever mention a solution, right? Then you've got to give the people the knowledge that they need to be able to make a behavior change, right? And it's whether we're asking them to engage with something or change how they think about something. And then, if we've done that right, then we've created a desire, right? And once we create that desire, we've created an awareness, a knowledge that people need to change, then a desire, then we introduce the solution, right? Then we work through all the reinforcement of how to get rolled in. And, I think, to your point, I think engagement looks different for different solutions, right? Some are, very episodic, some are more longitudinal. I think you've got to be really careful about how you define engagement by solution. And I think just like well-being initiatives that have to be hyper-personalized, I think the way that you look at engagement for your ecosystem has to be personalized as well, based on that solution.
Well, and let's talk about personalization, because that is a huge topic right now. Back in the day, and really up until pre-pandemic, as an employer, you almost had to design for the many, not the few, right? So if you knew you had a very high MSK situation in your population, or you knew you had a high diabetic prevalence in you designed your benefits around those you could affect the most. Now that we've layered in this lovely attraction and retention issue that we all have fighting for people in the workforce, personalization is the word of the day. And so how do you design a benefit program for each and every person in your population? And if you can't, which is super hard to scale, how do you kind of conquer that? Where do you get where do you find the ability within your force? And if you don't have an HR staff of 80 or more who can support those types of features, what's a good way where you can start chipping away at that personalization? And I've heard, people talking about segmentation, again, studying segmentation and reference-based pricing and all the things that we used to talk about that people could particularly pick their own benefits in a way, and what suited them in the moment. How are you looking at that right now?
Well, we do have the luxury that we've developed our own analytics approach. So we do look at on the payer side of the house, and we do look at people on an individual level and say, what does this person need, and how can we help that person? But to your point there, I think one thing that's a pet peeve of mine is that we all talk about holistic and hyper personalization, But then we go back and we silo it from a data perspective, right? We say, okay, we need to approach people with highly personalized and individual specific solutions, but we're only going to look at healthcare data, okay? So that kind of drives me crazy. So I think a holistic problem requires holistic data, right? And that's kind of been my mantra lately. So when we're looking at people, we got to look at the social determinants, where they live, because that affects utilization and availability of the solutions that are there for them. It also creates some unique opportunities. We got to look at what's going on in the workplace with them. What are they doing? What is their role in the organization? How do they work? Do they work days? Do they work nights? How many hours are they working? We look at Microsoft Exchange volume. How many emails are they getting, and what time of day or night are they answering those things, right? All that kind of starts painting this picture of what's going on in your organization. And then when you add the healthcare piece to it, you see the impact of it, right? So, most health and well-being initiatives don't happen at the workplace. They happen outside the workplace. So we can't remove ourselves from that. It's part of this holistic approach. So I think, my recommendation is, when you think about people, think about them really holistically and what's really going on with them, not just and then don't back up and go just to a health data point only kind of solution.
Well, and that's my biggest pet peeve, is that trying to find holistic data to match holistic issues, as we find constantly here at IBI in our research, is really hard. And having done those projects in past lives, it's easy to talk about bringing medical and pharmacy and behavioral and productivity data all together in one place and studying it in a holistic manner, but the data is not consumed nor presented in that holistic manner. And so, yes, we can Frankenstein together, well, here's what mental health is costing you across products and programs, but it is really Frankenstein together, right? We're pulling pieces from everything to try and track and measure. So we keep saying there has to be a better way. And there are some who have done a really good job of measuring in that manner, but your point is well taken. If you are going to approach a problem holistically, you've got to have the measures to be able to see if your solution is actually working holistically. And so let's talk about that a little bit. I think this is one of the good halo effects of the pandemic, is that employers are now realizing that it's not just about a one-to-one ROI. If I'm paying $1.50 PEPM for this program, I'm getting $1.50 back. That is no longer good enough, right? And doesn't even have to be good enough. Maybe you don't even want your $1.50 back. What you want is happy, healthy butts in seats doing their jobs, right? Who are going to stick with the employer for the long term, who are not only doing well at work, but thriving at home. And so these are all really lofty goals for all of us, right? We want to make sure that our people are safe at home, especially those that we sent home and don't really know what kind of an environment they're in at home. We could have been sending people home into food deserts, where when they were working in the office, that was their one good meal they had a day. We could be sending people home to, I was on a conference call one day a few weeks ago with a woman who was working out of her closet in her bedroom because her husband was working at home in the office and the kids were home because they were let out for school. And so what are our people doing while they're at home, and how are we measuring their ability to work at home if we've sent them there, and then vice versa? The ones that we're calling back to the office, who maybe have been enjoying that whole work at home, even if they're working in the closet, they like it better, it's more flexible, whatever their reasoning is. How are we going to serve both sets of people and keep them happy and healthy and productive at work? How are you approaching that new issue that we've been kind of thrown into due to the pandemic?
Yeah, I think you got to do a lot of persona work, right? What is going on with, if you can't get to that, what's going on with Kelly or Rich, then let's look at people that are similar, right? What's going on with working moms that are working from home as a persona? You know, what do they need? And we bring them in as a focus group, say, okay, how's this going? What's the ups and downs of this? You know, what do you need, right? What can we help with? What are your struggles, right? So we look at our frontline workers, our critical infrastructure people that never have gone home, and they're working harder than they ever have because of all the supply chain challenges out there. And so, okay, what's going on with you? What do you need? What is it? Sleep, nutrition? What can we help with? Same, that persona. You know, our technology workers are different, right? They've got different needs. Our C-suite people are, you know, everybody's got a different persona. So I think, you know, if you can't get down to that individual level, at least do some persona work so that you know you can group, say that here's solutions that fit this group, and then you can engage with them from there.
Well, I think the good news is that's a great point. I think the good news is, you know, back in the 80s and 90s, when we really started digging into segmentation and creating those avatars for each kind of persona that we found within our populations, we've got so much better tools now. I mean, the Gallup stuff is simply amazing. There are a lot of what I'll call non-standard gatherers of data about us in this day and age, who know more about our employees than we do as employers. And we have to start tapping into them because they have information that we, may not be comfortable asking. And so, you know, we have to start having some real courage in this industry. You know, there are still employers that I talk to who don't want to ask about race or ethnicity or where a person lives or if they have food available to them, or et cetera. If employers aren't comfortable, and I understand that some aren't, asking those much more personal questions that we ever asked, then we have to start creating these, here's what people who look like you, how they're consuming, how they're faring, how they're doing at work and at home. I want to ask you about one thing that I think has been a huge challenge in this industry forever, and that is the person at home who really makes all the benefit decisions, not your employee. So now you're rolling out your solution and you've done all your homework, you've got all your data, you've piloted, you've gotten great feedback from the employees you surveyed, but they're not the ones using the program necessarily. So if you rolled out caregiving and it's the wife who's using it or the stay-at-home dad who's using it, how do you stay in touch with the family?
Yeah, that's another great question, Kelly. Yeah, and you got to fill up the communication channels, you know, and you got to understand what's relevant to people. So, you know, we like a lot of people during the pandemic went back to QR codes, right? Postcards with QR codes. We see good engagement with that, so we send those home, right? We've got on a lot of the email we think need to go home. We'll put a red button on them that says forward home. So you click the button, it opens up. You put it, they can put in the right email address for whoever they're going to send it to and send it home, right? So those people that ingest things through email, you know, sometimes you just need to stick something in someone's hands. We invite families to our offices for health fairs and things like that, post-pandemic, obviously, but you know, we want to reach out, and then we'll invite our partners to come in and they set up booths and the families can walk around and speak to the different people. So, well, you know, what does this one do, right? And so, okay, let's talk about that. I think it's a variety of ways you've got to do that. But, you know, I think at the end of the day, it's behavioral economics, Kelly. You know, and we look at behavioral economics, and I'm a big student of that. It is fuel and friction, right? Fuel is what you're going to pay people to get them to do, right? And the incentives, the things that you put in place to incent people to do a certain behavior. And friction is, how do you make it easier, right? How do you remove friction to make things easier? What we have found is that reducing friction is much more powerful than paying people to do something. And so, you know, sometimes you got to pay people to do something to get started. But then it's all about removing friction to make it easy for them to do the right thing, right? It's the cut up fruit thing. Yeah, and we tried that here. We had some cantaloupes on a table, and nobody touched them. We didn't think they would. End of the day, some people would come grab one, right? But then we put out a bowl of cut up cantaloupes and the little plastic bowls beside them and the spoons, they disappeared almost immediately, right? So I think from a healthcare and a ecosystem perspective, we got to make things right simple is key.
And so you mean just putting out a yearly open enrollment letter that says, here's the website to go find everything you need on it? You don't think that's going to be a successful plan?
No,
No.
not a chance.
No,
Yeah.
I think those days are long gone. And, you know, those who are striving and thriving right now on the huge attraction retention issue are the ones who are doing what you all are doing. I think that given the current state of the economy and, you know, the big, huge balance of employers who are not able to just raise pay and say, here's your cost of living adjustment this year, which would be astronomical for many employers. There have to be these other ways to keep your employees satisfied, safe at work, healthy and thriving. Talk about how you educate your frontline people, your boots on the ground people about these new products and programs. So now you've rolled it out. How do you keep it in front of people? And do you encourage your boots on the ground folks, including supervisors, regular old supervisors and managers, to use it themselves to really get that word of mouth thing going? How do you do that?
Yeah, well, we use testimonials a lot, but it all starts when you hire someone, right? And I'm sure that most of the people on this call have a benefits orientation program that, you know, that is so much noise on the first couple of days someone's there, they never remember it. And if you stick a book in their hand, they forget where they put it, right? So, you know, what we have done is we've developed this 30, 60, and 90-day touch points with new employees. You know, and at the 30-day point, we just go back and we say, okay, you know, let's go back through that. And I want to make sure you understand the things that are important to you and how we can help craft your journey on this well-being journey with us here at ArcBest, right? And then at 60 days, we introduce them to one of our own health navigators that's on the payer side and our benefits team, and says, okay, you know, I'm your guide. And if you need something, you come contact me and I'm going to help you. So that's all you got to remember. Write down my number and here you go. And again, this is your plan. What are your most important goals? And it's really important to figure out what's important to that person. And that's where we do it. And at 90 days, we follow back up with them and say, okay, how's that going? Right? What can we do? What's going well? What's not? How do we tweak this going forward? And then we develop that relationship so that we can continue to work with that individual. So it starts on day one, and then the power of that peer-to-peer knowledge and transfer is really important. Testimonials are hugely important. Then you got to tilt the culture too. You've got to make it okay to talk about these things.
Right.
And you know, that's a page out of Dee Eddington's playbook, but you know, you've got to tilt the culture a bit so that you open the door to have those kind of discussions in the workplace, and that's the magic.
Yeah, it's got to be. That is I 100% believe it. I love that you use that philosophy at ArcBest. I think it's of all the employers that I've worked with, it's the ones who know how to do that well that usually typically have a much lower turnover rate. And I think you've seen that in your population. You are not experiencing the same turnover as others have seen the pandemic, are you?
No.
No.
We're much lower. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we have a couple of minutes left and we have some questions in the Q&A already. So let me just grab a couple of these. So very envious of all the due diligence that you go through. Have you experienced any program implementation or rollout failures? And if so, what were the lessons that you learned? That's a good one.
Yeah. We believe in iterating, and if we're going to fail, we want to fail forward, you know. So we thought as our ecosystem was getting more complex during open enrollment, it would be a great idea to go out and be face-to-face with our team members and have one-on-one conversations. So we got out, and our goal was to get in front of, have one-on-one conversations with 80% of our workforce, which is a huge undertaking. So we trained up this group of people that were going to do it. We sent them out, and during the month of open enrollment, we talked to 80% of our workforce, and they hated it. Yeah. I mean,
I believe
I
that.
have never gotten more complaints about something than that. They said, you know, Rich, you said open enrollment, it's fine. We know how to do it online. Said, if we need anything, we'll call you. Don't ever do that again.
We don't need your lunch and learns and roadshow.
So, we do opt-in lunch and learns with them during that time, but we don't mandate it. And
okay, good learning experience going forward. Yeah, and I think the other I think the other really big point is you have to be willing to fail. So, I mean, I've seen employers implement things and get terrible utilization, get no word of mouth, and for years continue to pay the PEPM fee because they don't want it to be perceived as a takeaway, especially now where you're trying to give more, not take anything. So how do you approach programs or products that aren't working?
Well, you know, I think we had a transparency provider, and luckily they're not around anymore. So I'm not going to names here, but we did our due diligence. We thought they were the right fit, and they just weren't. Right. So you know, you got to be able to, you know, what you have spent on them, engaging with them, that's a sunk cost, right? And if you make your decisions based on sunk cost, you'll never get to where you need to go going forward, right? So you can't let the sunk cost drive your decision making. You got to look and say what's work. Can you make it work with what's there? And if you can't, you got to call it and say, okay, look, we're still friends. We're going to part ways because this is just not working. Maybe you work better for somebody else, right?
Yeah, and you have to have that again, courage. And honestly, if you're totally transparent with your employees and say, here's why this wasn't working for you all. They can understand that it's not a takeaway. It's a change to something that might actually work. The next question is a statement and a question. We love your ramp up approach of awareness, knowledge, and desire before introducing a solution. We all admire that. But how do you know the readiness to change index here? How do you know when people are ready for the next phase? They are ready for the next solution.
Well, we're watching engagement with those communications, right? And we put some click-throughs on them, so make sure that people are learning. So, you know, I don't know that there's a perfect answer to that. You know, I think part of that's been in tune with your workforce. You know, listening to your wellness champions that are out there in the midst of it. Say, okay, are we ready? And you know, if we get the thumbs up, then we say, okay, let's introduce this thing. It's exactly how we did our virtual physical therapy solution. It's ramping. We had a call with them just a little while ago and said, this is ramping faster than anything we've ever seen. So you know, I think making sure that you're staying close to your people, you know, it's basic blocking and tackling here, but it's really important. And
it's important, but it's also one of the hardest things to do. So yeah, I think everybody on the call had a lot of comments today about admiring the way that you stay close to your employees. And let's be clear, a lot of your solutions are not costly solutions on how to stay close to your employees. It's time and investment, personal investment, but doesn't cost you anything to sit down and have, you know, lunch and learns and group discussions with your employees. You can do those huddles and doesn't cost you a thing, except if you're in manufacturing and they're off the floor for 10 minutes to have them. I get it. But these isn't rocket science. It's just being open and creating an environment where you allow your employees to talk about what they need.
Right.
Okay, last question. I'm sorry. It was a question at the beginning on engagement. So I think you answered how do you know that people, to the best of your ability, how do you know that people will engage before you roll something out? And I think you've explained very succinctly that you design around a challenge, not necessarily whether or not there's going to be engagement. And then you start building your program from there.
Exactly.
Let's see. Okay, that is it for questions. And we are at 1:59. So that's awesome. So thank you, Rich. Listen, thanks. We always enjoy having you. We love your outlook and your perspective. And honestly, I'll admire the success that you've had in this very, very area that we're trying to study. And that is how to successfully roll out products and programs that work for your employees. Carole, we want to thank you so much for all the hard work that you did on the research. And again, for all of you attending who are IBI members, this presentation will be posted on our website. The research will be released on the website, or already is released on our website, and then the recording of the webinar will be available to you as well. So thank you everyone for attending, and have a great week.
Thank you.